In just 11 lines, which soon you'll see, lies more philosophy than all the wisdom of the sages whose learning from experiment, endeavour, laborious enterprise and ceaseless toil have managed to compile. Still, all of that is naught compared to these 11 lines. And if you want to see your life more clearly, you'll want to watch this lesson to the end. What are those lines? They're none other than the words to Macbeth's final soliloquy, in which Shakespeare gathers up and distills all that is, that was, and will be on humankind's fated voyage through the void into one absinthe-bitter drop. Has that got your attention? Then let's dig in. Before we get into a closer look at Macbeth's Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow speech, I'd just like to say something. If you're coming to this video because you want to understand Shakespeare more fully and get an appreciation of him, or maybe you're doing your GCSEs in Shakespeare, A-levels in Shakespeare, or whatever education you're doing at college or some institute, there is a key to understanding Shakespeare, to being able to learn him, appreciate him, write about him. And it's not learning what others say. It's not finding the answers to an exam. There is a much more important key. And if you master this, you can deal with any exam going. It's just to understand what he means. Shakespeare explores the human. And as long as you understand what is meant, you'll be able to answer pretty much any question about that section. And as an example, when I did exams, we studied Macbeth for 2 years because our exams were all going to be on Macbeth. When the exam paper came, there were sections on Hamlet. So I read through Hamlet and decided that I would do my exam on Hamlet, because once I'd read it and understood what he meant, answering the questions came naturally. And I'm not a brilliant student. I flunked many different exams. But understanding Shakespeare, which I've been taught, just makes answering any questions so much easier. So having said all of that, let's have a look at this soliloquy. And the way we're doing it, I'm going to read the soliloquy rather blandly, so we just get familiar with what's been said. And then we're going to break it down line by line to get a real deep appreciation in our soul of what he's saying. And then, something I always advocate, we're going to deliver it as best we can, as if we were acting it, trying to get that emotion and feeling into it. And I'm not a professional actor, so it won't be great. You can laugh at me. But by doing that, you get a whole sense of Shakespeare. So having said all that, let's begin our analysis. Let's just read the soliloquy. She should have died hereafter. There would have been a time for such a word. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Now I read that quite level, quite blandly, because I didn't want to try and push any meaning into the words. I just wanted to hear the words. And one thing you might spot is that natural flow. There's a rhythm you can pick out in the way he speaks, and that is blank verse. It's written in iambic pentameter. The first thing to notice about that is how ennobling iambic pentameter is. It elevates speech. And if you want to know more about iambic pentameter, I have an in-depth video on that, which will help you a lot in your exploration of Shakespeare. But what we want to look at is a line-by-line blow of everything. However, before we start that, I want you to notice a constant theme from the words going through this soliloquy. Once we point it out, it will become almost obvious, and it's going to help you understand exactly what this is about. So, in the very first line, she should have died hereafter. Hereafter means in the future. Next line, we have the word time. The third line, tomorrow, 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 that is time. The next line has day to day, that's time. The last syllable of recorded time is in the next line, so time again. The next one doesn't state time at all. And then a bit further, we have that struts and fretsies hour, that's time, upon the stage. The following line says no more. This is a link to time. This soliloquy is Macbeth brooding on time and the brevity of our life. That we are here and time runs us by and then we are not. Keep that in mind as we go through everything now, line by line. So, the first line, she should have died hereafter. Now, what's he talking about here? Well, if you look back in the previous lines, he's just been told by his servant Satan, that's Seyton, he's just been told because he heard a woman scream that Lady Macbeth is dead. She actually killed herself. And Macbeth's response to this is, she should have died hereafter. In other words, now is not the time for her to die. She should have died in the future. Her life has ended before its time because she's committed suicide over becoming mad with guilt for her role in the murder of King Duncan. So that's just how he starts it. But this comment that he makes about the future, she should have had a future, triggers a thought in Macbeth. And this thought is a premonition, in a way, of the fact that he's about to meet his own demise. Because at this point, you have his enemies coming towards him, who are Malcolm, who are going to lay siege to his castle. He's preparing for that. But he thinks we can, withstand a siege. What he's about to say now, he's meditating on life and how brief it is. And literally half a page from this, he's going to suddenly realise that his life is coming to an end. So this is a foreshadowing almost instantly of what's about to happen to him. But just listen now as he broods on time and our place in it. Remember, he's been triggered by the word hereafter, future. She should have died in the future. She should have had more life ahead of her. Now let's go to our next line. There would have been a time for such a word. Okay, so we've brought in time again. Now what does he mean here? There would have been a time for such a word. Well, he's saying, we've just talked about hereafter, the future, and now he's saying there would have been a time in our lives, me and Lady Macbeth, where such a word would have been appropriate, a future. Now, although he doesn't think that he's going to be defeated in the upcoming siege, not right now anyway, his life has unravelled because of the killing of Duncan, because of his, vaunting ambition and Lady Macbeth's ambition. They've been driven to insanity, to madness. Their life has become full of horrors and terrors and bloodshed. He actually, when he heard the scream of Lady Macbeth as she killed herself, he said, normally in my past, that would have set me on edge. I would have been terrified. My hairs would have stood up as if they had a life of their own. But now, he says, I'm so full of horrors of slaughter and such that it doesn't affect me. He's a hollowed out man. His ambition and his guilt have driven everything away from him. There is nothing bright in his life. Only darkness exists in the future. And so the future now no longer has any relevance to him, no matter if he lives or not. So that's why he says there would have been a time when there was a word for this. Going forward, looking forward, hereafter. Now, He specifically wants to pick out a word in his musing now which depicts future as we, all of us, the whole scope of humanity, sees future and refers to it. But he doesn't take it in the massive extent of the future as if it's postponed, but how we regularly talk about it. Look at what he says. The word is tomorrow. We refer to tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. We're going somewhere tomorrow. Let's do this tomorrow. We're always making plans for the future. And that's even just one step ahead of us. But then look what he does. He says there should have been a time for such a word, tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow. We're always making plans the one day ahead, as if there is an infinite number of them. This line does several things poetically for the actor. It does so much. For a start, you can hear the slowing down of the pace. There would have been a time for such a word. Tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow. It's also bringing in a bleak aspect. That cadence, he's not saying tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. It can't make it into a sing-song statement. And what he's doing is we're slowly, watched for this, we're slowly at every line being drawn a step deeper into Macbeth's psyche, to feel as he feels. Because remember, he has become king, he has become regal, he has power, he has prominence, although he's now being fought against. But what does it add up to? That's what Macbeth is coming to realise. And by the way, if you read Shakespeare's plays, this is the theme that covers nearly all of them. The fleetingness of life. Shakespeare observed and seemed to be somewhat addicted to and wanted to shout out to the world, stop and think about life, stop and think about its meaning. Your moment here is very transient and very short. But here's Macbeth putting it into some of the most grand terms for us to understand. But then look at the next line. We'll do the next two lines. He says, creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. That is beautiful writing. So, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. He's sort of musing and meditating, and his thoughts are developing one step or another. We're following his train of thought. Now, it says tomorrow, from the moment we think about it as the future, as if we've got an infinite number of tomorrows, but as he slows tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow down, he says it creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. Time creeps forwards. We may be planning it as if we're eternal, because none of us really stop and think about our death that much. But it creeps on. And actually, it's going to keep creeping until, as he says, to the last syllable of recorded time, to the end of everything. You see, your tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow will come to an end. Mine will too. Death is inevitable. But we have a progeny, and they live. And in their youth, they will have grand ideas. Even in their middle age, they still will act, even if they're aware of frailty, they will act as if there are so many tomorrows, a hereafter. But time will creep with its petty pace until the last syllable of time, progeny to progeny to progeny. Eventually there'll be one last generation, and then time creeps past them. Now, what Shakespeare wants to do is he wants to draw up in this rhythmic, ennobling way a realization of both the preciousness of time but its fleetingness, almost the tragic hopelessness that even if you get to the top as king like Macbeth, time overwhelms you. Now, this is something that he's talked about before. So if you were to have ever read Richard II, his hollow crown speech, he talks about death as an antic holding court in the hollow crown of a king, and he lets the king act as if his flesh is walled about with brass impregnable, as if he is eternal, as if he is too great for anything bad to happen to him. But when death laughs at his pomp and splendour, it says death comes along just when the king feels impregnable. It says he bores through his wall with a pin and goodbye king. In other words, time, with death as its servant, will eventually creep over everybody. This idea of creeping, by the way, petty pace, it gives us the idea of walking. Time can be vast, but actually time gets past us in the most infinitesimal of steps. Every second is passing, and it's a petty pace. In fact, time is not even used particularly well by us as humans in most of our life. How often do you spend, or how many hours do you spend scrolling TikTok or things like that? What a petty pace that time is coming through. It's a petty use, but it's also a petty speed. It seems so small and trivial while we're living it, but soon it creeps over us in these tiny steps. It's important to keep this petty pace because he's going to give us an analogy of someone walking in a moment. And all of these little phrases add to an easy picture in the mind. So let's go to the next part. By the way, I love the phrase last syllable of recorded time. You know, even a book ends with a syllable. So if it was the end, the last thing stated was end, and then even the sound of it has gone. Even a book is made up of tiny, petty paced words. Not even words, petty paced sounds, syllables, until they've vanished, the end. Brilliant, isn't it? And now look at the next line. This is so good. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. There's a lot in this line. I would like to pick out first yesterdays, because what was he talking about at the beginning? He said, she should have died hereafter. We have life left to live, a future where we plan and place things. And then he said, regarding that hereafter, we call it tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. But what does every tomorrow become? It becomes today. And very quickly, yesterday. In some respects, you could say every single second becomes yesterday because it has been and gone. And look at what he says. Really understand this because it's so magically potent. All our yesterdays, every single day of our lives up to this point, which were all our yesterdays, what have they actually done? They have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Imagine a corridor or a road or an escalator, whatever you want to put in, that goes into death. And all the way along, you have scenery, but there's candles all the way along to light your way, so you're not just in darkness. That's what all of our yesterdays were. Every day of our life that we've lived has lighted us the next step towards our inevitable demise. It sounds quite bleak, but do you sense there's a grandeur in this as well? We are going to talk a little bit about the meaning of this, the philosophy of this right at the end, so stick with it. So he's saying each day may have been a sunny day, it's lighted, we've gloried in the day, but he's actually, all of this is in a sardonic tone. If you're writing for GCSEs, that may be a word you would like to slip in, that Macbeth uses a sardonic tone. It means grimly mocking. We live our life with gaiety, with glee, with hope, with dreams, but when you step back and you're close to your imminent doom, it becomes grimly mocking. All of those glees and delights and whatever have just lit the way, slowly but surely, to death. Brilliant, isn't it? But it's not just that. How does he speak of us and himself? Because when he's doing a soliloquy, he's letting you into his mind, his innermost thoughts. So how does Macbeth think about himself? Remember, he's a king. He's come to the top. He was Thane of Cawdor. He was the greatest warrior right at the beginning of the play, if you remember. And yet he says, "I yesterdays have lighted" what? Lighted fools. A fool. Now, a fool, Shakespeare is obviously aware that this is a play and that the people watching can see the players, the actors. Now, amongst actors, you have fools, those who are the jests, those who misunderstand things. There's some comedy in this with the gatekeeper. And they ramble on about all sorts of stuff, and they're insignificant partners to the rest of the company, to the play. And yet they do have some great things to say. You think of Falstaff, he brings up quite a lot. Although he's quite wise, yet he can play the fool. But ultimately, Macbeth as king and main character is only like the fools. They just give some mirth along the way. Their role is insignificant. Their lives are meaningless. They have no grandeur. By the way, the fools, when in Shakespeare, often do not speak in iambic pentameter. They do if they're being very witty, but when they're just chatting, they just talk in normal sentences. And that allows you to hear that they are a lower breed of character. All of the insignificant characters frequently drop out of iambic pentameter, and the noble and main characters use iambic pentameter, as Macbeth is here. But he recognises, despite any pretense to nobility, of grandeur, of meaning, we are all fools whose yesterdays have lit our path, the way to dusty death. Dusty death is an important phrase. It's not as important as everything in here, but dusty death, there's alliteration, dusty death. We had petty pace. It's interesting, that petty pace has now got us walking on a dusty death, a road of dusty death. The roads of Elizabethan time, they weren't roads like ours. They weren't well made. You may have had cobbles in certain parts of the city, but even in the city, the majority of it was unfinished roads. Outside of the city were dirt roads. As we move along, we kick up the dust. And of course, there's an allusion here to the Bible, which Shakespeare does all the time in his plays. What is man according to the Bible? It says, "From dust you are, and to dust you will return. So to dusty death." We go into the ground, we dissolve into it. We're a fool going along unwittingly into death because we don't think about the meaning. We don't think about our ultimate demise. We always think there is a tomorrow. But the problem is, after that tomorrow, there is another tomorrow and tomorrow. And if you add them up, it creeps in with this petty pace until you go to dusty death. Isn't it brilliant how he's using sound as well? But you can look at that more fully later, understand his meaning. Life creeps on, and we merrily, blithely, and ignorantly walk through it with our plans until we turn to dust. Now let's carry on. This is a great little line. He says here, "Out, out, brief candle." Now what's he talking about here? Well, you could imagine him actually, I haven't seen many plays where it's acted like this, but you could imagine him holding a candle. There is its light. Do you remember all the yesterdays lit our way? Lit the, what does it say? Have lighted fools. Light is something positive. Light is life. But imagine him holding a candle. How frail is a candle flame? You know, if you were holding a candle up in front of you, like we've got this fool walking down an Elizabethan road, they have glass lanterns to protect it from the wind, but the wind can still break in, and frequently what happens to the flame? It wobbles. But as long as we've got it, we don't think about it. But he says, "Out, out, brief candle." Now, could it be that Macbeth picks up a candle from his desk, maybe, because this is nighttime that it's taking place. Can you imagine him just going, out, out, brief candle? How easy life ends. It's but for a moment. Candles also have been used to record time. So you could get candles which would burn down in like 3 hours, and you could use that to measure time. So brief candle, watching it just go down. Did he have in his hand the stub of a candle which was just about to gutter out? And then what use is the candle? Isn't it thrown into the scrap? Does anyone remember a candle that they used? No. Out, out. But imagine also that you're walking on the dusty path of death and your candle blows out. Suddenly your life is cut short. You are in the dark, the void, and down you go. You crumble into the dust right there. What a vivid portrayal. Do you get the sense, quite deliberately now, do you get the sense of how meagre yours and my existence actually is? How it hangs by just a silk thread ready to just snap. It's a candle sputtering which gives us light and we're confident while it's there, and yet one breath and it's gone. This idea that Macbeth is sharing is an idea Shakespeare has imbued into so many of his plays. One of the lines that I like in, I think it's one of his first plays, Henry VI, says, "For ere the glass that now begins to run finished the process of his sandy hour, these eyes that see thee now well coloured shall see thee withered, bloody, pale and dead." It's fantastic, isn't it? Do you see the connection with the out, brief candle? This instance, you've got a man dead or cut down in the field of battle, and he's talking to his friend as he bleeds out. And his friend says, "Ere this glass which now begins to run." The glass is an hourglass. And he's talking about the time of his life. Before this time runs out, you who I see now with colour in your cheeks will soon become dead. You're going to be just bloody because your blood's coming out, and you're going to be dead, and you're going to be, ashen. The colour is gone from your face. Time just creeps on with its petty pace, albeit a violent end in that play. But nonetheless, that idea of time keeps coming. We have a finite moment in space, in time, amongst all of humanity that's run before us. If you understand this and can express it, that will help you with any exams. If it's just appreciating literature, get the poetry of this. Get the sheer awesomeness of how long time is and how small a place we possess on it. It should, I think Shakespeare's trying to say, it should cause everyone to stop and really think about what they're doing with life. And what is the meaning of it all? Get some meaning. Anyway, we're going to walk on now because we've got another illustration that he's going to use, another piece of imagery, which is phenomenal. I love this. Where, as we read it, I want you to think that this is being delivered by an actor whom all of the crowd watching in the theatre know is an actor, but they're drawn in because they realise that we're all human beings. You're drawn into his role as Macbeth, but they are aware that it's an actor, and it becomes a visual piece of imagery then, a literal piece. It says, "Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more." I mean, just listen to the rhythm of that. That rhythm of iambic pentameter is shooting the message almost unfeelingly through you. It's like so sharp a cut you don't realise you've been pierced. And yet, once it strikes deep, it leaves you breathless. Let's just take it a bit by bit. Life's but a walking shadow. Right, so the idea of a shadow is it's temporary, isn't it? It's so ethereal, it's so two-dimensional, it's flimsy, it's flaky. That gives us an idea of, when it says life, it's talking about our life. Because when you die, if you were to be revisited, we talk about ghosts, that would be a shadow, wouldn't it? An ethereal being. But as well as that, I want you to think about all of history before you, right now. How many famous people can you mention? Now, what do you know about them? They may have walked on this earth and been real and been lit by their yesterdays all the way to their death. But no matter what their legacy is now, they're just faint shadows in the past. Can you name your great-great-grandfather or great-great-grandmother? And yet your life comes from them. And yet all they are these shadows in the past. But there is a real powerful thing in here. If you're taking notes, you'll want to put this down. He says life is not, he doesn't say life is a shadow. He says life is a walking shadow. This is significant. It's well known to theatre goers that you have in a theatre company, or sometimes independent to a theatre company, what's called a walking gentleman. So imagine you've got, say Romeo and Juliet, at the beginning you've got a man, two men in the street. They come on, they only speak a couple of lines to each other, and that's them done for the whole play. They're called walking gentlemen. The company of actors could literally hire a walking gentleman because they're like, oh, we need someone just to walk in and get bopped on the head or something like that. They may not even have words. That's a walking gentleman. Life is the most insignificant player in the entire production. He says life, our life, is a walking, not player, a walking shadow. Imagine that. Imagine you didn't actually even walk onto the stage. You just cast a shadow across it. That's how insignificant you are. Now here's the question. In the scheme of history, think back to the ancient Egyptians and all that they've left. Think back to the Greeks. Think back to the Romans. Think back to the Chinese dynasty. Think back to the cradle of civilization in Africa. How much of it do you know about? It's just a walking shadow. And now compare your own life to that. Oh yeah, it's a shadow. It's not even a bit part player. Do you see what Shakespeare, isn't it? But he's doing it in the most beautiful of language. But look what else he says. He says a poor player. So this is interesting. It links to the idea of the walking shadow or the walking gentleman. But a poor player. Some people come upon the stage and they think they act with greatness and all that kind of stuff. Maybe they've had prominence in life. Think of someone like Napoleon or Julius Caesar, for instance. But actually life is a poor player. And look what it does. It says that struts and frets his hour upon the stage. Well, we'll just stop at that. Struts and frets. This could, it's, strut is to walk, what's the word? There's a phrase which I just can't think of now. But it's like raising your legs, you know, you're striding out with full confidence. Now, that's what life is. We go into life and we strut our hour upon the stage. We have so many grand ideals. We may brag to friends about our plans for the future. We may think we're so significant because we're the centre of our little world. And we fret our hour upon the stage. This is when in the acting, the player has to get morose, has to get sullen. And they may put as much feeling into it as they possibly can. But they're a poor player. They don't even do that well. And in life, how well do you allocate your time in life? How well are you using it? If you're young, what are your plans for the future? Have you got an eye to the future, or are you playing it like a poor player? And ultimately, in some respects, what's being said by Shakespeare is no matter what you do, you're a poor player, because life is but a walking shadow. You'll always be less than a bit part in the scheme of eternity. And then look at that. The idea of time comes in. He struts and frets his hour upon the stage. He may do it loudly. And then is heard no more. It's a bit like that last syllable being recorded to the end of time. Once you repeat or say the last syllable, where is the speech? It's like Richard III. He gives a great soliloquy, now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by the son of York. And by the time he ends it, and he struts, when he ends that, he says, dive, dive thoughts down into my soul. Here Clarence comes. As soon as he said the word comes, where is that speech? It's gone. When we live life, we strut and fret so we can be pompous, bombastic, full of high hopes, positive. We fret, we have our anxieties, our troubles, our worries, which are all so meaningful to us. And then we're heard no more. What were the last words of your forebears? You don't know. We're heard no more. Now, look at this final bit. I absolutely love this. This is where William Faulkner got his idea for the title for one of his books, and it's been quoted umpteen times by different writers. We've got the colon just after it's heard no more. So the colon signifies he's had his thoughts, and now he breaks and he sums up our individual lives. He's talking about his own life here. It's not life in the abstract. It's life as it is lived. Your personal life. This is what he says. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. That is just, I would give my eye teeth to be able to write a sentence like that. So notice, it is a tale. What is a tale? A tale is a story. We think of a fairy tale. A tale tends to be, in my opinion, a fleeting story. It's not like an epic. It's not a saga. It's like a play, actually. And the play would last, 2 hours? Maybe 3 if it was a particularly long play. So it's a tale. A tale also isn't necessarily true. We can see when we pass off, when we shuffle off this mortal coil, another phrase of Shakespeare's talking about death, is our life something that really happened? Now you might think, well, of course it is, it's something that happened. But as far as you are concerned, if you're dead, you wouldn't even know you were alive. Where were you before you were born? You don't have any recollection. And your life may have been true while you lived it, but because it leaves no impact on the future and history is an unreliable recording, if someone heard of your life, would they think it's merely a tale, not something true? Do you see how fleeting a shadow this is? What does he say? Out, brief candle. I nearly said short candle. Not only is it a tale, we make the story. And it says it's a tale told by an idiot. So think of what an idiot actually is. You could think of a village idiot, that's the fool. But the term idiot in Shakespearean is rather crass and something not politically correct now. An idiot was someone whose mental faculties were severely impaired. So whether that was through a bad injury or because they were born some way with a problem, they don't have their full mental faculties. They're often portrayed back then as having garbled speech, not being able to pick the right words, often dribbling, drawing weird signs on things, acting bizarre. He says life, specifically our life, or the majority of lives, are a tale told by an idiot. Imagine a story written by someone who didn't know how to write and didn't have a plot and didn't have a scheme for things, didn't have a structure, didn't understand grammar, anything of that kind. What would that tale be like? You certainly would call it a tale because it didn't have any meaning. Well, how many of us, a real good question here, see what Shakespeare's doing. How many of our lives are lived that actually have a plot, that actually have a deliberate thread weaved throughout, holding the course of our life together, which brings it a unified meaning? How many of us do that? How many of us have a structured life? I don't mean you have a family and a job and you go on holiday once a year. Not that. An actually well thought out, deliberately placed existence. Do you know, if you were to talk to most people, and I've talked to, I promise you this, I've talked to hundreds, if not thousands of people about meaning in life, and given talks about it and all sorts. Not many people have a plan for life. Myself, to a degree, included. Most of the tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow is full of us just dealing with that day and thinking about what we might do in the future, which we never get to, because that chops and changes all of the time, until when we come to the end of it, we look back at our life and in many respects you could say it's a tale told by an idiot. You think, wow, I really didn't use that time well. And why didn't we? Because it came with its petty pace, leading us, through our yesterdays, lighting the fool down to dusty death. How brilliant is this? It's fantastic. And then, what is in this tale? Well, it's not plot, it's not meaning or anything. It says that the tale is told by an idiot, full of sound and fury. Sound and fury. Great claims. Sound. Shouting out, this is what I'm going to do in my life. This is where I'm going to get. This is who I am. This is my importance. Fury, as we rage against the obstacles of life, as we rage against maybe the inevitable, we do look at death and try and sound out a way to beat it. Maybe some will say, I'm going to leave a legacy for posterity, and that way I will stick it to death and eternity because my posterity will carry on and on and on. But that's fury and it's sound. When you're dead, what does it mean? Shakespeare arguably has done far better than most people in that his plays are still enjoyed. We're talking about them now. He has a legacy. But to Shakespeare, what use is that? Does he know we're talking about him? Of course not. So the sound and fury in the end, what did it add up to? It says signifying nothing. What's Macbeth saying? He started with, she should have died hereafter. She should have died later than now. She committed suicide. She had life left to live. But then, actually, life has treated us in such a way that it means nothing, the word we could have had for it. Tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace. Sorry, I just had to draw the blind because the sun suddenly came in very strongly. So, yes, we talk about tomorrow, but actually it passes so quickly. We talk about tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow. And yet it overtakes us. And once it does, and we descend our way through all of our yesterdays into dusty death, it signifies nothing. I want you to take this to its absolute ultimate end, because talking to people and see what Shakespeare's trying to get you to see. See the potency of this speech. Some people say about meaning that the meaning of life is to pass on life to someone else, and that means something. The problem with that is when you've passed it on and you have died, gone your way to dusty death, are you aware that you passed it on? So what meaning did it have for you? Of all the lives lived on this earth, how many of their stories, activities, hopes, dreams, aspirations, troubles, worries, how many do we know of? Barely any. Go How many of your forebears do you know even the name to? How about the address they once lived at? Do you know anything about their finances? Do you know anything about their loves, their first love, their first kiss? No. And so it has no meaning for you other than that you are here, which is what Walt Whitman tried to draw out, that you are here, that life exists and identity. And that we can contribute our own verse. But Shakespeare would argue with Whitman and say, still not meaning. It's sound and fury, signifying nothing. But go forward in time. Scientists, physicists, astrophysicists say that eventually the universe will suffer a heat death. Now when that happens, all of human history will be as if it never happened. So leaving something for progeny, or having children, there's nothing noble in and of itself. And if the universe were to pass away, because the petty pace of time will even outcreep it, where does that leave us? And that's what Macbeth is saying. But does that mean it's bleak? It is grand. When we read this over again, I want you to feel the grandeur of the finiteness of life. However, it does beg, and I personally, when I read Shakespeare, go through all of, Hamlet has this problem, Othello has this problem as well, Lear, time is in all of them. All of the nobles in his histories, time beats them all. I think Shakespeare was interested in it for a simple reason. And here's the question, and this is where Shakespeare matters, this is where literature matters. If potentially our life is played by, a walking shadow, a poor player strutting and fretting its hour upon the stage, shouldn't we give it more attention? And more important than that, shouldn't it behoove us to look for meaning? Because something about the art of Shakespearean poetry says this doesn't make sense. That's why we're full of sound and fury. So what else is there? Where is meaning? And yet, do you know, talking to most people in my life, and I want you to think about all the people you've talked to in your life, how many times have you found people who are truly interested in finding the real meaning of things and not just living the tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, lit by their yesterdays to the dusty death? Out, out, brief candle. And that, how much more philosophy? There is more meaning in those 11 lines. I know there are 12, but she should have died hereafter is a separation from the 11 of his musings. Those 11 lines hold more significance, more meaning, more insight, more glorious melancholy than nearly all of the philosophy books you will ever read. Because no matter what the philosophies are, time creeps on with its petty pace. That should give everyone pause for thought. But before we finish, it's time now to read the play with as much meaning. We want to see Macbeth suddenly dawning on him the transientness of life. Its insignificance no matter how high you reach. It's why Macbeth is a great tragedy, because as an audience, we see a man who is different from the rest. He is set apart. He is greater than we are. And if he can be humbled down, we feel that tragedy far deeper. If that was just an ordinary man dying, we'd feel sadness. When it's a great man dying, it's tragedy, because it puts everything in perspective for us. So, before we finish, I just want to read through this little soliloquy. The Queen is dead, my lord. She should have died hereafter. There would have been a time for such a word. tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It's a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Okay, so I'm not an actor, but I hope you can understand by hearing me read that there's so much wealth of meaning and feeling when you understand what Shakespeare is saying, that it can possess you to a degree and you can begin to hold onto it, to recognize its full meaning. Now, if you do that, your appreciation of Shakespeare will skyrocket, because that's but one of so many wonderful pieces of writing from him. And if you are doing this for school or college or whatever it may be, do you see how understanding what he means is all that's necessary to get Shakespeare? Just understand the meaning of the words and the rest will follow, because you will feel it. And if you really want to feel it, once you've gone through and understood, like with this one, I recommend right now, you get the play out and you read it several times. You deliver it as if you are Macbeth, not from a stage, but as if you are Macbeth, realizing what your life amounts to. And if you're really wise, you'll take that work of art and ask some very deep and searching questions about your life right now. I hope that you've enjoyed this review or analysis of Macbeth's Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow speech from Act 5, Scene 5. If you have, please leave a comment down below. It helps promote the video for others who might want to learn it. And please, please share this video, whether it's with a teacher or whether it's with a study group or your peers at school, or whether it's just you're in a literature group. Please share it, because also that helps as well. Until the next time, I wish you joy in your reading.